I would love to bring the panelists back.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, go ahead. That's fantastic. We're going to have a panel. I'm going to invite Linda Dicking and Mike Wolf to join Cecilia Tam on stage.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. They're going to conduct a panel. We'll join up the panel on how technology is changing the way we eat. So that was 3 very interesting, shocking, disrupting presentations. Many questions, I'm sure, there are on the air. So go ahead. And I don't know if you want to tell the audience to raise their hand if they have any questions.
Sure.
Or
We're going to leave the questions towards the end.
the end, and we'll see how we're doing with time. Thank you so much.
So I have to say I'm a little bit nervous because I'm here with 2 amazing food expertise, and so I'm going to take Agassi's recommendation, which is to talk with confidence so that I can, feel a little bit more empowered. Okay, so obviously I think very far in the future and the possibilities and whatnot. You are looking at more global and systemic understanding and how to introduce design into a more integrated perspective. And you're looking into the end product of how we create this kitchen in the future. And so I think it's actually a great combination in terms of trying to understand how we can actually put these pieces together. So for me, 100 years ago, 150 to 200 years ago, we actually, as humans, we were struggling to get food. It was purely about sustenance. It was purely about survivability. But now we're in this, most of us in developing countries, it's about abundance. We have a lot of food around us. It's not a question anymore about whether we're going to eat. It's a question of when we're going to eat, whom we're going to eat, where we're going to eat, how fast we're going to eat, and all sorts of different variables that we now have the choice of. So I wanted to know, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I think that now that there's this change from survivability to abundance, I think we're going to have another shift. And I wanted to know, following up my talk about how can we look into the future, but with the lens of can we actually create a sustainable convenience in our food culture? Mm-hmm. And so.
Okay. A big question. I think fundamentally the concept of convenience is a little bit broken, honestly. And I think the idea of cooking real food is only inconvenient because we've lost our way and we've forgotten how to cook. And because people aren't prioritizing food in a way that they used to prioritize food. So I think now we are obviously very busy and our lives are more chaotic. But at the end of the day, I think going home and spending half an hour cooking a meal from scratch is a great way to spend half an hour. The problem is that nowadays, I think people don't have the skill set to navigate the kitchen properly, and therefore it becomes inconvenient because you don't have the knowledge and you don't have the skills. And I think the other thing we're struggling with is that people's aspirations outweigh their ability in the kitchen. So we're all used to watching cooking shows and we see these incredible meals that people bring to life, but we can never create those meals. Like that's just not reality. And so I think there's a tension there between what people aspire to eat and what they're able to cook. And I think if we reset our fundamentals around convenience and cooking, it actually would shift a lot of things. And I think we could be quite sustainably convenient, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think that sustainability and convenience are diametrically opposed as we think about it as first blush. I mean, think about how Japan reinvented auto manufacturing in like the 1970s, right? They went towards a just-in-time manufacturing process, and it made things way more efficient. You know, in America, we go to Costco like once every 2 weeks, buy a giant truck full of food and bring it home, and I have ground beef in my refrigerator that oftentimes goes bad if I travel and I don't think about it. But what if we start to think about using technology towards making our lives more convenient by letting food get to our house when we need it, if we can do it sustainably, right? We don't want a bunch of packaging. And we do it just the right amount of food. So not only am I getting the right amount of food at my house at a certain amount of time, rather than just having a big pile of food in the refrigerator, but I'm also doing it sustainably. So I think it partially is a rethink of what convenience is, but also trying to align sustainability and convenience to make our lives easier in a way that also wastes less food.
Right. So one of my major concerns, and you've mentioned it a little bit in your talk, is that how can we have from one end of the spectrum obesity and food waste, and the other spectrum hunger? There seems to be some kind of distribution problem or some misalignment. So how can we understand as consumer and be responsible consumer and even active participants in this system, how can we start driving those changes from within?
I mean, I think part of the problem, and I mentioned some of this in the talk, is around everybody's been responsible for designing their own piece of it and has been sort of blinkered and sort of, this is just my piece and I'm going to design it. So one of the things that I think needs to change is collaboration across multiple stakeholders, whether that's large food organizations, farmers, academia, policymakers, bringing those people together to actually think about the entire system and then understand what might some of the unintended consequences be of designing within that system. And then, I don't know about you guys, but I attend food conferences all the time, and a lot of the emphasis is on talking and sharing information, but not necessarily geared towards action and doing. And so I think about a way in which we can bring people together that represent those different areas of the system, but then also move into tangible, actionable things, and not just leave it in a sort of abstract place where it doesn't get acted upon.
Right. But how do you then make the alignments of incentives among all of these stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, something is terribly broken there, and there's obviously, I even see it in a lot of the work that we're doing. It's so much easier, the deal flow that happens and the way in which innovation is prioritized in for-profit world versus non-profit, or social impact versus, a business. And there's something off there for me, the fact that it's so much easier to get millions of dollars to fund building a new brand, but it's really difficult to get millions of dollars to get a kids' education platform off the ground that's going to teach them culinary skills in school. Right. And so there is something fundamentally broken around how that deal flow is working, and honestly, I'm not even sure how that gets fixed, but something there around the deal flow needs to get fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts?
I think the reality of the situation is corporate and oftentimes government actors and entities have their own agendas. And there's so much friction and waste because we're pursuing our own agendas independently. But I do have a lot of hope, I think, I think I'm starting to already see that's changed, because I think that part of it's a generational shift in thinking, that if we don't start to work together, we're just going to fritter away the opportunity and the margin for error that we have. And so I think that we're starting to see big companies, NGOs, and political entities work more closely. And I do think some of these new technologies will also empower this and help us to move towards like a more sustainable future, whether it's something like CRISPR and gene editing or some of these other technologies I have a lot of hope for, I'm super excited about, and we could talk about all day, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, there's certainly a trend in terms of changes in our values, right? So currently there's a lot of hype in the US at least that talks about farm to fork or beans to bar, and I don't know how much of this is like hipster talk, but there's definitely a market of these people investing in this. And I can even imagine in the far future, where we're talking to farm to fork, where maybe farms could be in drones that are being delivered to your home, and literally from the farm to your fork. So how do you see this? All of these different values and changes and perspectives at the end culminate into this final sanctuary of the kitchen. You talked about that, do we even need kitchen anymore? If we don't need kitchen anymore, then what would that be, what that hearth will be in the future?
Well, I think depending on what your value system is, what you value on an individual level and household level, I think technology and innovation will help you achieve those more easily. I think if you are someone who believes in food transparency and really want to know where your food comes from, like there's technology that will enable you to create hydroponic farms or maybe start to have bioreactors in your home. Like there's nothing more transparent than actually watching the food grow in your home. If you are someone who values health and fitness and wants personalized food, I think using some of these new tool sets to allow you to get towards those ends, I think you can achieve those through technology and innovation. So I think it's hard to give one description of what this home of the future looks like, because we all value different things and we live in different scenarios in different parts of the world. But all I could say at a general level, new technologies will help us to achieve what we value more easily with less friction.
Yeah, there's definitely more opportunities because it could be an actual place, it could be virtual, it could be hardware, and it could be science. So
I was just going to say, I think we've definitely, I mean, there's so much technology in food right now, it's almost frightening to imagine what the future might look like because there's so much noise. And from my perspective, it's about thinking, it's not technology first, it's human first. And what does the human need to be able to create the food that they want to eat? You know, things like personalized nutrition and sort of DNA-based food is interesting as a concept, and I think if you're somebody trying to heal yourself, then going through personalized nutrition is a really interesting way to go. But I wonder what that does to, you know, the fact that food is very communal, it's very community-based, it's to be shared, you know, it's about breaking bread. And what does that mean when we're all sat around eating our individual personalized meals? Like, where's the joy in that? And so I worry that there is this shift towards what's right for individuals and sort of personalized versus what's right for a community or a society. And that frightens me a little bit.
yeah, I'm going to add a little bit onto this projection of what that might look like. So I was talking to a friend of mine the other day and talking about music. So not food, but music. And so we were looking at this trajectory of like in the beginning, you know, music was, you know, an actual disc, you know, a record or a CD, or maybe even a CD. But as physical objects you buy, you go to the store, you buy, and you bring it home. Then it became iTunes, where you can buy the song, download it, and then it migrated to Spotify, where you pay a subscription, and now you have access to millions of music. And what would be the future of music? It might be generated, right, instantly to your to completely fit your profile and your likes and preferences. So, would there be in the future this kind of a Spotify for food, for example, where you can have, you know, not only personalized meals, but like knowing that time of the day, what you should eat, how you should eat it, with whom you should eat it? Is this the kind of future that we can imagine?
It's not a feature that I would subscribe to, personally. And I could see that maybe for certain groups of individuals that would be really interesting. And I think, again, managing health, I think for people that are acutely sick and for managing actual diseases, I think that's an interesting concept. But I really worry about us going down this future where control has been taken away from us because we've already lost so much control in food. We've lost control over where it's coming from. We've lost control over how to cook it. And so removing it one step further for me makes me really wonder about where we'll head as a society. So I don't subscribe to that future personally.
Well, if I could take a different lens and look at it through, when I think of the macro trend towards things like Spotify, it's really about being less of an ownership society and more of a either pay by the month or like a shared resource society. And one of the things I actually get really excited about when it comes to food is this idea of just two-sided marketplaces or sharing economy marketplaces that allow you to have access to things you normally wouldn't. So whether that's like things like AB 626 two-sided marketplace platforms in California, where basically home cooks can cook at home and then share their foods through two-sided marketplaces with other people, I think that's great. There's been companies like no smaller than Electrolux, where the CEO talks about, will we need to own our own dishwasher in the future, or could we potentially use a neighbor's dishwasher, right? So this idea of like using sharing economy platforms to get access to new food experiences, put food or types of food into reach of people who may not be otherwise be able to get it, I think is really exciting. So that's where I get excited about this type of Netflix for X, right?
Yeah,
I'm okay with that version.
I am too. I'm just trying to, spice up the conversation. So you, Mike, you mentioned in your talk about values in the society, the Gen X, the Gen Z, Gen X. I don't even remember what generations, Gen Z, and the millennials, and they're certainly changing. You talked about digital natives, and probably in the not so far future, we're going to have AI natives. So how do you see intelligence, data, AI begin to really infiltrate our kitchen, our food, our experience, and our relationship?
It may seem counterintuitive, but I think things like artificial intelligence may make experiences seem more human and natural. So an example is that we're all familiar with, at least today, most of you, is Siri or Alexa, right? This is a conversational interface. It was not natural for us to wind up a machine to get it operating. That's not a normal thing. But talking to something is very natural. I'll give you an example. My mom, who's like 70, still hasn't figured out email. Like, that's not a joke. She literally can't get email right. We gave her an Amazon Echo for Christmas, 2 Christmases ago. And like a month or 2 later, she calls me up and starts telling me about how she's like having a great time talking to Alexa. I'm going, like, I'm cycling through my mind, is Alexa like a new person in the neighborhood? Is there a relative I don't know about? But like, for her, like every day she gets up and asks Alexa what the weather is and gets information. So just like, and that's AI, right? That's basically an artificial interface. It's a virtual assistant. I think these types of interfaces could make experiences more natural or more human seeming. I do think the kind of the danger and the disconnect could be where we see this like uncanny valley experience, right? Where we start to find experiences that are almost human, but they're kind of creepy because we know there's something off. I've heard that term applied to like impossible foods, burgers, or whatever, right? Although I think they've gotten over the uncanny valley because it seems so like meat. So I think this idea of like getting towards more natural human-like experiences using AI could be really exciting, but I think there is a potential creep factor there.
I think even the term artificial intelligence, if it was really about augmenting people's intelligence, then I'm okay with that version. But artificial makes me feel like, again, we're losing more control and we're giving it to somebody else. And I feel like if there's a way to actually use AI to enhance an experience and to enable us to do things that we couldn't do without it, and to give us the ability to learn new things and new skills, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. So bringing the people back into this conversation, how do you two envision the chef of the future being augmented either by intelligence or not? Maybe it is an intelligence in and of itself. How do you guys envision what this persona look like?
I think the chef of the future will probably need to embrace digital tool sets more. I mean, I think there was a lot of worry as we moved towards like digital creative tool sets like Adobe, right? That like the art of painting would be lost. But we've seen an explosion in creativity, right? I think chefs are at their base form, they're artists. I also think that so using these digital tool sets could enable them to create more interesting things, maybe new flavor pairings they never thought of. What chef doesn't want to create a flavor that's never been created before? Like every chef probably would want to do that. And if AI or software can get them to that end, I think that's exciting. I also think because they're artists, why can't they embrace the power of digital distribution? When Beyonce puts out a new album, it drops 24 hours later, everyone in the world could have heard that album, right? At least in the modern first world economies, everyone's listened to the new Beyonce album. Why can't Wolfgang Puck or whatever chef drop a new recipe and then like around the world people taste it, right? So why can't we use digital technology to basically put the power of a chef's creativity into my kitchen? And whether that's using like a precision cooking tool that understands and follows Wolfgang Puck's instructions perfectly or whatever, I think that's potentially exciting.
Yeah, and I think, chefs are in an interesting moment right now. You know, there's such big influences in the world of food and their voices are being seen and heard. Chefs, I think, in the future should continue to be stewards of thinking about food as an experience, right? Taste, senses, flavor, smell, but also sustainability and sourcing and the stories behind where the food is coming from. I feel like that's a big piece of what chefs are responsible for now. So if the digital revolution can give them more of a platform to scale that thinking and to influence more people, I think that starts to get really interesting, and they're definitely starting to do that already. But I love the idea of being able to download, whether it be a Tyler Florence meal or a Mario Batali meal, and actually have that be made for me in my kitchen of the future.
Right? But that's the Netflix for food.
Like
to get the Tyler Florence subscription, right? That'd be great.
Yeah.
I'll subscribe to that. I think we might have some questions. Can we post them from the social media? We're gonna take some questions and maybe even a question or two from the audience if we have time. Okay, so I can't really see. Yes,
Yeah.
could you? Here's a question.
Somebody asking here, which country do you think is most developed in terms of food changing? Was something you said or you asked, they're quoting you, I think. Or somebody's asking here, is there one food trend right now that you're especially passionate about? Cecilia Tam.
One food trend for me.
Yeah.
I am really fascinated with this whole notion of digitizing food. And so the concept of being able to separate taste, separating texture from the actual food, and then we combine it so that you can create new sensations and new experiences. And I think that's very fascinating. That's my take. It's a very different.
I'm super excited about gene editing and CRISPR. I mean, I think the ability to create food that may otherwise be terrible for you, but you can maybe reduce some of these kind of harmful health effects. I think it's a conversation we need to have as a society, right? Is this GMO? I mean, in the U.S. they would argue no. In Europe they might argue yes. Yeah. So it's an interesting conversation regionally, but I do think there's a lot of potential for what we're seeing with gene editing and food.
Mine is a little more simple. It's sort of the fact that consumers are taking back control of food and demanding higher expectations around where their food is coming from and who's behind it. And I think that's happening specifically in geographies where you're in cities, it's higher income, it's better, higher education levels. The fear that I have is that that's not necessarily happening in lower incomes, in more urban areas or suburban areas. And so you're starting to see this sort of bifurcation and sort of two very different food value systems being built. And they're becoming even more different from one another. And I'm concerned by that, the difference in the two of them.
If I may, I'd like to add one more trend that I think is fascinating, which is the biome, and not just our body biome, but soil biome that can start giving us data and more information on the food that we're growing and how that ends up being in our body. So those will be...
There's another question, if you can be just very short, but they say, which country do you think is the most developed in terms of food changing? They say in Cecilia, but I guess it's for the whole panel.
I have an answer to that because, and it's a region in Spain, so for all the Spanish people here, I just spent a bunch of time in the Basque Country. For those of you who don't know, San Sebastian has the highest number of Michelin star restaurants in one area. And gastronomy is a priority to them. But with that comes responsibility for the land and thinking about where food is coming from, how it's sourced. They're very transparent. And for me, it was a real awakening to a future that I would love to see more of, honestly. And if we could take a lot of the values that they have in the Basque Country, I think we'd all be doing much better for our health, and we'd be eating better. We'd be eating better food. So I would say the Basque Country and Spain. Yay, España.
I think it's hard for me to pick one. I mean, if we're talking about gastronomy and just innovation there, I think the Netherlands, quite honestly, with the university research there, they're amazing. If it's adopting and embracing robotics in food, like I would say probably Northern California. If it's like doing crazy things with new appliances, I think China is doing some really interesting stuff in China. So it really kind of depends on what you're talking about and what part of food tech that we're talking about.
Yeah, I would definitely say China, not because I'm Chinese, but China because it's it was very rooted in agriculture, and now there's this huge investment in all sorts of areas and technologies, and there's a huge overlap and opportunities. And let alone that the population is so big that any tiny introduction of innovation, it's scaled massively in very short time. So China is definitely a big player in terms of driving the changes in food.
There are many questions. There are more questions, but I think we're running out of time, so I think we have to wrap up. I'm sorry, but you have to answer them by Twitter later.
Okay.
So just to wrap up, do you guys want to have a final word and advice to the audience as to how we perceive the future and how we can start making change from today onward?
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
Yeah, I mean, mine is we are responsible for the future of food. It's not somebody else's job. It's ours, quite literally. And so I think we have to start taking big steps. And I know Danone is the leading company doing so many things that are going to inspire other food companies. But I think as individuals in that company, it's companies don't make decisions, people do. And so really it's your responsibility to help reshape a better food future.
I think so much of having more sustainable food future rests in changing consumer behaviors. And I don't have the magic answer for that. I wish I did, because we're stubborn. Humans are stubborn. We don't want to change. We want convenience. So you talked about earlier, sustainable convenience. There's amazing work being done in like really sustainable packaging. I was at Seasoned Chips, and they showed this packaging that actually you can eat. Like, so let's do away with throwing away altogether. Just drop the pasta in the water, the packaging dissolves. So think about ways to make products that are convenient and sustainable, and then ultimately help consumers change their behavior over time, because they're not going to change their behavior overnight. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echoing what you guys are saying. We all need to do our parts from the consumer end. We need to change our behavior from the corporates and the big companies, and we needed to start instilling these products that are more driven by values and sustainability. So with that, thank you very much, both.
Thank you.
It has been wonderful.
Thank you very much.